He wasn't always like this. That's the thing nobody says out loud when they look at a man who has become short-tempered, withdrawn, reactive, or simply gone cold inside a relationship. Nobody asks what he was like before. Nobody traces the distance between the man he was when he entered this relationship and the man he became inside it. They just see the anger, the coldness, the wall, and they draw their conclusions from what's visible without ever examining what produced it. But there's a story behind the anger that almost never gets told honestly. And it doesn't start with an angry man. It starts with a patient one. A man who tried repeatedly, calmly, genuinely to be heard by someone who had the power to hear him and consistently chose not to. What you're looking at when you see an angry, shut down, or emotionally absent man in a long-term relationship is usually not his original character. It's what's left after years of that character being systematically ignored. This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're talking about one of the most important and least honestly examined dynamics in modern relationships. How women, often without any conscious intention to do harm, train the men they love into the very emotional states they find most difficult to live with. And what that process reveals about what's actually required for a relationship to function without destroying the people inside it. Let me start with something that needs to be stated clearly before anything else. The vast majority of men do not begin relationships as angry men. They begin as men with the same basic human need that everyone has: to be heard, to have their experience of the relationship acknowledged as real and worth engaging with, to be able to raise a concern about something that genuinely matters to them and have that concern land with the person they're closest to. That's not a complicated need. It's the most basic requirement of genuine partnership. You matter enough to me that what you bring to my attention receives genuine engagement rather than dismissal. And for most men, in most long-term relationships, the erosion of that basic experience is where everything begins to go wrong. Here is how the process actually unfolds. And I want to describe it carefully because the details matter for understanding why this happens to good men in relationships with women who are not inherently terrible people. A man has a concern, something in the relationship that's affecting him negatively. Maybe it's how she speaks to him in front of others. Maybe it's the consistent decline in physical intimacy. Maybe it's a pattern of decision-making that excludes his input. Maybe it's something she does repeatedly that he finds genuinely disrespectful, but that she seems unaware of. He raises it, calmly, choosing his moment carefully, using measured language, trying to communicate the concern without making her feel attacked. He's doing everything the communication experts recommend. He's being the reasonable, emotionally mature partner he was raised to be, she responds, but not by engaging genuinely with the content of what he raised. She deflects, or minimizes, or makes it briefly about her feelings about how he raised it rather than about the substance of what he raised. Or she agrees in the moment, and then the behavior continues unchanged, as though the conversation never happened. He notices, but he's patient. He assumes she needs more time, or that he didn't explain it clearly enough, or that the right moment will come when it can be addressed more fully. So he tries again. Same result: deflection, minimization, momentary acknowledgement followed by continuation of the unchanged behavior. He tries again. Different approach, different language, different timing. He's genuinely trying to find the key that will make this land. Still nothing changes. Now something important is happening inside him that she cannot see and that he himself may not yet have words for. He's learning, not consciously, not deliberately, but with the deep, reliable accuracy of anyone who encounters the same result repeatedly from the same action. He's learning that raising concerns in this relationship produces no change, that his experience of the dynamic doesn't carry enough weight to produce genuine engagement, that the careful, measured, patient communication he's been attempting is functionally invisible. And alongside that learning, something begins accumulating. Not anger yet, frustration at first. Then something heavier, a quiet building resentment that has nowhere to go because its natural outlet, honest communication with his partner, has proven consistently ineffective. The frustration builds, the resentment deepens, and at some point, after enough repetitions of the cycle, enough patient attempts dismissed, enough genuine concerns treated as inconveniences rather than real things worth addressing, the patience reaches its limit. He snaps. The tone changes. The measured language gives way to something with more force behind it. The careful framing disappears, and what comes out instead is rawer, sharper, more urgent than anything he's expressed before. And here's the part that has to be examined with complete honesty, because it contains the most important truth in this entire conversation. She hears it this time. Not always, not in every relationship, but often enough that the pattern is undeniable. The thing he raised calmly 12 times without it registering finally registers when he raises it with evident anger or desperation. The concern she deflected through 10 patient conversations suddenly lands when the patience is visibly gone, and the lesson that teaches both of them is devastating. He learns that patience is invisible in this relationship, that careful, measured communication produces nothing, that the only register she responds to is the elevated one, that if he wants to be heard, he has to be loud, intense, or emotionally extreme enough that the concern cannot be deflected. She learns simultaneously that his calm attempts don't require genuine engagement because they don't escalate if ignored, that the raised voice or the evident anger is the signal that something actually needs addressing, that the patience, ironically, was permission to not listen. Neither of them chose these lessons. Neither of them sat down and decided this was how they wanted to operate. The lessons were taught by the dynamic itself, through repetition and consequence, the way all behavioral learning happens. And once these lessons are embedded, the relationship has fundamentally changed. He is no longer the patient man who entered it. He's become something more reactive, more guarded, more prone to intensity, because intensity is what this relationship taught him works. His original patience, his genuine attempt to be the measured, reasonable man he believed he should be, was slowly trained out of him by consistent experience of what happened when he tried to use it. She, meanwhile, is living with a man she finds increasingly difficult, increasingly volatile, increasingly unlike the man she fell in love with. And she genuinely doesn't understand what happened. In her experience, he just became angrier over time. The connection between her consistent non-engagement with his patient attempts and the anger that eventually replaced those attempts is invisible to her. She only sees the anger. She never traced it back to what she did with the patience that preceded it. This is the tragedy at the center of this dynamic. Both people are experiencing real pain. Neither fully understands their own contribution to producing it. And the longer it continues without honest examination, the more it compounds into something that eventually becomes irreversible. Let me be precise about what is actually happening psychologically when a man's reasonable communication is consistently dismissed or ignored. When any human being attempts genuine communication and is consistently met with dismissal, something specific happens to their sense of self within that relationship. They begin to doubt whether their experience of the relationship is legitimate, whether their concerns are reasonable, or whether they're the problem for having them, whether the thing that's bothering them is actually worth bringing up, or whether raising it just marks them as difficult or oversensitive. This self-doubt is corrosive in ways that go far beyond the specific issue being raised. It's not just that he can't get this particular concern addressed. It's that the consistent dismissal tells him his interior experience doesn't matter here, that the relationship is not a place where his perception of reality carries weight. A man who internalizes this over years becomes something very specific, not simply angry, fundamentally disconnected from his own voice inside the relationship. He stops raising things not just because raising them doesn't work, but because he's no longer sure his sense of things is trustworthy. He becomes the man who says nothing is wrong when clearly something is, who responds to her questions about his well-being with fine, even when he's nowhere near fine, who has stopped expecting genuine engagement with his interior experience because the expectation has been disappointed so many times it no longer feels worth maintaining. This is what emotional collapse looks like in men. Not dramatic breakdown, quiet, total withdrawal of authentic self-expression from the relationship. The man is still present, still functional, still going through the motions of partnership. But the genuine him, the person with opinions and concerns and feelings that matter, has retreated somewhere she no longer has access to. And she often doesn't notice until something dramatic forces the reality into view. Either he finally leaves, which appears to come from nowhere because she never saw the accumulation that preceded it, or he has the kind of complete emotional breakdown that breaks through even her defenses. Or someone else does see him, really sees him, and the contrast between being genuinely heard somewhere else and being chronically dismissed at home becomes impossible to ignore. What would have prevented all of this? The answer is straightforward, even if the practice of it requires genuine discipline. Genuine engagement with his first calm attempt to raise a concern, not agreement necessarily, not automatic acceptance that he's right and she's wrong, but real engagement. The kind that communicates your experience of this landed with me and I'm taking it seriously even if I see it differently. That response, early in the pattern, before the frustration has accumulated into resentment and the resentment into anger, changes everything. It tells him that this relationship is a place where his experience matters. That calm communication is the effective mode here. That patience and measured expression are rewarded with genuine engagement rather than with dismissal. And when that's the experience, the patience doesn't run out. The frustration doesn't accumulate. The anger doesn't get trained in as the only register that produces results. The man who entered the relationship as a patient person remains a patient person because the relationship gives him genuine reason to remain so. The failure point is almost never the anger. The anger is just what becomes visible when everything else has already failed. The failure point is the 10th time his calm concern was deflected without engagement. The 15th, the 20th. By the time the anger appears, a great deal of erosion has already occurred, and the question that matters is never, why did he get angry? It's always what happened to the patience that came before it. Here is what men in this situation need to understand clearly and act on, because understanding the dynamic without acting on it just produces more sophisticated suffering. When you recognize that you have been in this cycle, when you see clearly that you've been patient beyond what produced any result, and that the patience has been training you into a reactive version of yourself that you don't recognize, you have a specific responsibility to yourself. Not to perform more patience, not to find more sophisticated communication strategies that might finally land, not to absorb more dismissal while waiting for something to change on its own, to name what has happened directly and clearly, to say without anger if possible, without drama, from the grounded place of a man who finally sees clearly what has been occurring. I have raised concerns about things that matter to me in this relationship many times. They have consistently not received genuine engagement. That consistent experience has changed how I operate inside this relationship and not for the better. I'm telling you now, clearly, that this cannot continue. Not because I'm threatening you, because I'm being honest with you in a way I should have been more forceful about much earlier, and then to mean it, to hold that line, to make clear through consistent behavior rather than just words that the dynamic has reached a point that requires real change rather than another cycle of patience being dismissed and anger being produced. Some relationships, when this clarity finally arrives, produce genuine reckoning from her. She sees the pattern she couldn't see before. She understands her contribution to what the man in front of her has become inside this relationship. And she brings genuine willingness to engage differently. These relationships can recover, genuinely. Not easily and not quickly, but genuinely, because both people finally have honest contact with what actually happened. Other relationships reveal, when this clarity arrives, that genuine engagement was never available, that the pattern of dismissal wasn't situational but structural, that this particular partnership was never going to give him what he needed to remain the patient person he was when he entered it. That revelation is painful, but it is infinitely less costly than continuing to allow the dynamic to produce more of what it has already produced. More erosion. More anger that he didn't come with and didn't choose. More of the patient man disappearing and only the reactive one remaining. He wasn't always like this. That's still true. And understanding what changed him and why is the beginning of the only path that leads somewhere worth going. Either the relationship changes in a way that makes his original patience viable again, or he leaves with the understanding that his patience is still there, just waiting for a dynamic that deserves it. Both outcomes are better than the alternative of staying and continuing to become someone neither of them actually wants him to be. Men, how many of you recognize the specific exhaustion of raising something important to you calmly and watching it disappear as though you never said it at all? Subscribe for the honest conversations that finally give good men the language for what has been happening to them.